I'll go through a couple of bits of governance that I typically get involved with, but an observation there, and I've seen this in other disciplines as well, science, engineering. An observation is that one of the things that's been, I've seen a lot of folks talk about this in different sectors, and that is, as AI comes in, we need to focus on the human aspects, and the human aspects are going to be critical thinking, decision making, judgment, negotiation, interpersonal skills, etc., etc. All of that kind of thing is what we are calling human. And then data processing, analysis, something, all of the things that we would say that AI does more effectively. Now, in all of the disciplines we're talking about, and we're talking particularly about the legal sector today, but if we have this paradigm where we say, or the culture where we say, well, decisions have to be made by the person at the top, there's no delegated authority. As if I'm not the guy at the top or the girl at the top, then if I'm not that person, I have no practice in decision making when it's critical. Until I get to the point where I have to make critical decisions, and then I have no practice for my entire career.
Yes.
How do I get good at making decisions when they matter if I've never done it?
Well, this is the reason for the case that I make for a really fairly radical shift in the way in which leaders are trained and developed and helped and nurtured within these organizations in order to equip people in the ways that they need to be equipped for the challenges that they will face. Because naturally it's going to happen that whether or not the powers that be within these large organizations want it, they are going to need to change, because you mentioned a little earlier that, there's obviously an element here of the client educating themselves. Now, if we just bring it back to that for a second, the client has obviously access to ChatGPT and lots of new ways of being able to just go and ask, okay, am I asking the right questions of my lawyers that I'm hiring? Am I, how can I, all sorts of ways in which clients just took it as given before that what they were getting from a trusted advisor that they'd made a decision on hiring. There's a whole new paradigm of thinking around how am I getting value for money, because the general counsel client is absolutely being just so much pressure is on them for value for money as well in these current clients. And so obviously that pressure trickles down. Clients are being a lot more challenging around, what does value for money look like in this new era? How are you are you doing it responsibly? But you have to be able to say, are you using it responsibly? And what does that actually mean? That's a huge topic, but you have to be able to say that you're using AI for most organizations now, because if you don't, then it immediately brands you as an organization that's still stuck in the dark ages. And so, and you are automatically going to be charging a much higher rate than an organization that isn't using these tools. And so it's huge, the pressure that is already on law firms from clients to innovate. So I think the question is really around, so there's so much around leadership and how the whole business model is going to change. There is going to need to be more nimbleness. Now, we're not talking about turning every law firm into some kind of a Silicon Valley mimic. Like, obviously, there's just, let's be realistic here. What we're talking about is the ability to be able to pull from different levels of multidisciplinary and expertise in a way that there is more of a seamless story being told from different layers of expertise and different tools being able to integrate with each other in order to create better and more meaningful workflows that actually solve clients' problems. And in order to do that, there's going to need to be extremely good communication, much more transparency, and a lot better ways of being able to handle the human side of things, which is risk aversion. Like, how are we going to address the level of risk aversion, the level of lack of accountability amongst leaders? I would say that there's more pressure now. There is a new cohort of young solicitors and professionals. And I do want to just clarify, I'm specifically talking about the world of solicitors and not barristers, because that's a whole other kind of world to delve into. But where AI is also impacting the way that they work, but of course it's a very different kind of model I'm talking about there. There is a cohort of young, I'd say often, really innovative, a lot of examples of female leaders I've seen that don't want to talk about age necessarily, but people who are, they haven't been in the workforce for as long as many who are currently in the sort of most powerful positions, and they are starting to make their way in these organizations, and they are demanding something different. They are providing something different for their teams. They are having open discussions, for example. I wish I could shout out names, but there are some fabulous people I've been working with there. They literally hold forums where they say, okay, let's really go over this with a fine-tooth comb. Let's do a mock court case around how we handled this matter. And I want you to throw things at me. Where did we go wrong? Did anything go wrong? If it did, let's have this totally open session. Let's record everything. Then let's do something about continuous improvement around it. Let's follow up and change things for the better. So that requires a level of vulnerability around a leader modeling what it looks like to be open to criticism, to be open to looking at things properly and then addressing them. And to also saying sometimes, sorry, I didn't get that right. Okay, so what can we really meaningfully do to ensure that there's a better upstream solution to this problem, so that if anyone like me is in the same position, or if I even make the same mistake again, that it's going to get caught earlier. That sort of mindset is starting to creep in. It's just nowhere near enough to cope with the level of radical sort of shift in leadership that's required, I think, for what is to come.
That's very interesting. And I think, so in the governance space, obviously you have all of these things like oversight and accountability and delegated authority and roles and responsibilities, and, having the right org structure in place, and maybe having somebody who looks at responsible AI principles or ethics or some of these things alongside organizational development, and how we might ensure that the human element and the AI element are working together synergistically to make sure that you get the best outcome without necessarily displacing the workforce completely. And there's obviously, fear and all of these kinds of things around job losses when it comes to AI. So there's that piece. There's also the piece around risk management, because we have the EU AI Act upon us in this area of the world, and that does have a risk-based framework. So if you are implementing things that can be making decisions around, for example, sentencing or anything like that, that's a very high-risk application. Whereas if you're looking at just data analysis, then I'm putting in, even if I'm not putting in any personal information, I'm just looking at the case law, the stuff that's out there, looking at the regulatory environment and what's out there, and doing that level of analysis. That's going to be a much lower risk application of artificial intelligence. So how mature, or how much have you seen in the legal space the application of any kind of risk management framework when it comes to AI implementation?
So it's there and it's happening, and I don't want to just talk about them as this big sort of nebulous kind of
the sector
cohort, but the law firms are investing in hiring people who have these skill sets, and they are opening up quite large sums of money for programs to look into, risk management and especially around data as well. There's quite a lot of money being thrown at it, and the hiring of fancy people. What I'm seeing is the inability of those wonderful experts to be able to really have any meaningful and efficient and effective impact within the timeframes that are needed, primarily because to really understand this entire landscape, you need the engagement of the lawyers. The trouble being there, and this is the same issue that is being faced around the innovation and the integration of AI tools within day-to-day operations within practice groups, is that currently speaking, there is still an incredibly strong impetus towards the lawyers, certainly the ones who have decision-making power and who could meaningfully input into the decisions that need to be made around these other big programs within business services functions. They are not able to free up enough of their time to really input and spend some time grappling with what actually needs to be grappled with, because they are still under the incredible pressure for billable hours. And that pressure is, so this is the key thing that I see being a real challenge for how law firms are able to truly innovate. is that their best minds actually ought to be spending time on how are we innovating? How are we putting our minds together with these other people who we're hiring, actually giving them time and actually designing new ways of working, really understanding our data, really classifying it in ways that make sense for our business and for the external market? How are we really thinking about future needs and integrating our knowledge for how our internal landscape, legal landscape needs to operate in comparison with the rest of the market and in comparison with what experts tell us is good governance for our business? So that synergy is not happening at the moment. And it's primarily because of the constraints of the pressure of billing.